So the first topic I'm going to be talking to you about, by the way, I'm Steve Geraci from East Tennessee State University. There we go. So the title, official title, is Declining Non-Contributory Invitations. The real title is Saying No. And I didn't put saying no to your boss, but it's saying no to your boss. Which I'll point out, my boss is sitting in the audience, which I didn't know he was coming, but I'm going to give the same talk anyway. This is my conflict statement. I receive author royalties on a book that I published about 6 years ago. Otherwise, I have no conflicts related to this talk. So, some of the realities. Where are we starting from? The first 3 or 4 years of your faculty career are the most critical to your future success. By the end of 3 or 4 years, any guarantee or startup package you have will have been expended. You will have established your practice pretty much, and the view of who you are within your institution, what you do, what you don't do, your skills, your abilities, will be pretty much set in everybody's mind. So if those first 3 or 4 years do not work out well for you, the chances that you're going to be able to either redirect or advance direct your career is pretty small after that period of time. Every institution, every relationship has conflicts. The conflicts related to work assignments and things like that, typically they come from one of 4 sources. Either miscommunication, misunderstanding of that communication, poor process discipline, which is another way of saying you didn't negotiate, or a loss of focus on the big picture for your career. Rarely, but occasionally, it is because of intentional deceit. There are places that will promise you anything and give you the same job everybody else has. Luckily, those are fairly infrequent, but they certainly do exist. Also recalling that systems and leaders have very differing priorities. Whatever is in the press, the latest politics, the latest university needs, and of course always coming in money, money, money. So as a consequence, all these different changes hitting at one time, and everyone in your chain of command having different priorities and different sorts of demands on them really lead to one reality. You have to be the best advocate, the strongest advocate for your career. Okay? Your superiors, your division directors, department chairs, even deans may have very good intent, but realistically they're human too. And they have things they have to get off their desk. They have assignments from their superiors. So there's always going to be bias involved there. You are the only person that has a sole interest in your career. Okay, so how do we avoid some of these conflicts coming up? Well, it starts with negotiating your offer. So, people don't use the right terminology here all the time. A contract is a legally binding document. You will sign these when you assume a job at a new institution. They're almost always created by the institutional lawyers. The components of them are very general. They will not have the specifics of your job. But also what is in there is rarely, if ever, negotiable. It may have your academic title, it may have your department association, and then everything else will be kind of boilerplate of what would apply to all the other employees at your level coming in. So things like benefits, when you get paid, we'll go through a few of these. Things about conflicts of interest as far as your practice goes. And these are typically signed, they may be signed by your chairman, but also going to be signed by the dean, perhaps the vice president, or the practice CEO, or chief financial officer. So actually, you may have 2 or 3 of these. You may have one from your university, you may have one from your faculty practice plan. If you work for the VA, I think they have something equivalent, although they don't call it a contract. But again, those issues are non-negotiable. The offer letter has the details of the job. These are legally non-binding. So what does that mean? Does that mean they can put anything in it and then say, oh, I didn't mean it? No. It means that you can't sue them for them not doing things that are in that letter. That's all that means. On many other levels, it is still considered binding, but you cannot bring suit in civil court. Okay? These are typically signed primarily by the people closer, like your immediate superior, or maybe that person's superior. So a division director or chief, a department chair. If you're coming in as As a division director, it might also be signed by the dean. Okay, step 2 in avoiding conflict. Before you negotiate your contract, create a thoughtful personal career development plan. Okay. Now, if you don't know what that is, please come to tomorrow's workshop. The first hour I will be talking about making career decisions and career development planning. But the idea is that you have your priorities set, you have your values set, you know what's most important, what's not as important, things you might be willing to give up to get other things. That value set is really critical. Compose a picture of the job you think you're looking for. Now, I have ideal here in parentheses because the ideal job cannot be working 4 hours a day on Tuesdays and getting fully paid, full salary, okay? Yeah, right. Deciding on those priorities, the value, the relative job components, what's the most important thing for you as far as an activity or, let's say, an aspect of support or startup package. And I use these 3 categories: something that's essential, something that's acceptable, and then something that's a deal breaker. And if you can kind of put the variables into those 3 categories, that will help as you go into your negotiation. And finally, do your homework. Make comparisons. If you work for government or going to work for government institutions, state or federal, salaries are available through Freedom of Information. A lot of times they're just available on a website. You just got to find the website. Also, you're free to talk to people. You might talk to your colleagues who went to other places to find out what they're being offered for similar jobs. The more information you can have, the more tools in the toolbox, the better chance you have of getting the job that you're hoping to get. Okay, now the negotiations. That offer letter or agreement letter, whatever it's called at your school, you want to get as much detail in there as possible. Okay, all negotiable details can be put in an offer letter. Okay, so if somebody sends you a 2-line offer letter and it doesn't say how much protected time you're going to have, what your startup package is going to be, how many clinics you're doing a week, how many months on this service or that service, those details are not in there. You don't sign it. You send it back and say, this is what we discussed. You might write it out yourself as you send it back. I'd like all these in my agreement letter. If somebody comes back and they promised you something, I'm going to have that next, and they promised you something but they're not willing to put it into writing, go work for somebody else. It's that simple. I come up with no reason why someone would make a sincere promise and not be willing to have it over their signature. And I have been on all sides of this. I've been a chairman, I've been a division chief, program, you name it, I've done it short of the dean's office. And I've seen this from all the different viewpoints. So a lot of this comes from my experience also. Then also understand what is negotiable and what is not negotiable. So things that typically are negotiable are your work RVU goals, your collection goals. How much of that is going to translate into how many dollars in your salary? Whether or not your malpractice tail premiums, if you leave, will be paid for by your department or your division. Loan forgiveness, if you're right out of training, is another thing you can negotiate. Certainly startups, guarantees, maybe some research funds, or a practice income guarantee for the first couple of years as you build your practice. And the work assignments themselves, all are negotiable. Things that are typically not are the benefits, your different insurances, disability, etc. Any conflict of interest, these are usually set by the lawyer, so typically you're not allowed to go out and give a talk and say you're representing the school when you're not representing the school. You're also usually not allowed to go out and practice medicine or do whatever you're doing as part of your job in a way that could potentially harm the institution you work for. So unfair competition is usually in there. And there's a number of other things. But again, these are usually set by either the college or the university or perhaps the practice plan or some combination thereof. Think on the high road. Think about parity. You want to be reasonable. You do want to negotiate as strong contract as you can. However, you got to work with those people in that division and that section. So if you are, Madeline Albright and can negotiate, world peace, and you go in there with this tremendous salary and very little workload, you're not going to get along very well with your colleagues that are carrying the majority of that work and getting paid significantly less. You got to live there. So keep those things in mind as you're kind of going back and forth. And then accept some flexibility in wording. So an example of this might be, let's say you're a general internist, and the wording will be you do up to 5 months on inpatient service, up to 5 months on consults, but not to exceed 8 months total per year. Okay? That gives your chairman or your division chief some flexibility, gives you some flexibility, and you really need that when you're running a big organization. You almost cannot predict everything from the beginning and have it all in writing for everybody that's there. So expect and be willing to give some flexibility. Okay, some things not to do when you're negotiating. Don't involve a lawyer. Lawyers do contracts. Lawyers want to know everything, including the underwear size of the person who's negotiating with you. They want to see every dollar that's spent, every bit of income. Things that academic departments and even dean's offices are not prepared to put into an agreement. Okay? Your letter of agreement is with the university and the aspects of that school, the college, your department, and perhaps your practice plan. Okay? But let's say the financial security of your practice plan is not available to lawyers who might want to see that. I've never seen a negotiation that involved a lawyer work. I hired lawyers early on. I really regret it. Destroyed the job. Actually never took the jobs as a result. So all the lawyer's doing might make you feel better, but you're going to feel better unemployed. And I come from a whole family of lawyers, so I'm not being biased. My niece is an assistant attorney general. So don't make salary your own priority, your only priority. Okay, I think that happens way too often. You'll have a lot of debts, school debts, weren't able to pay a lot during residency or fellowship, and that number creeps up, and all of a sudden it's like 8 times what you ever made in your life, and you're saying, just sign me up, boss, and I'll do it. No matter how much you get, sooner or later the money will not be enough if the job is not meeting your other needs and your satisfaction. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. Be able to make a cogent argument for the things you want. Let's say, for example, you plan to do a lot of clinical investigation. Right? It's a very reasonable thing to want to, say, have a half-time research nurse paid for by the department for 2 or 3 years, kind of get you off the ground. Well, maybe your other colleagues in your division are not getting that. They're not doing clinical investigation. So what are you hoping to use that resource for? How will that resource not only help your career development, but your department and your college? Understand before you go in what's not negotiable, and please, please, just put that stuff out to the side. If it's really not negotiable, things that are in the legal contract, then don't waste the time. All you're going to do is aggravate yourself and everybody else. Lawyers will want you to get them to change the contract, and then we change the contract. Okay? Go in with a win-win attitude and let that come across in your negotiations. This is not something where you will win and your department will lose. You want everybody to win so that when you're in there and you finally get in that job, not only are you getting the things you need and you're growing your career and doing the things you want to do, but in addition, your department, your division is reaping the benefits from that. You're adding to their publications, you're adding to their grant funding, you have new programs coming up that look great to the community, helping serve the underserved populations in the area. And please, 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 I know this looks like a no-brainer. Don't sign anything that you haven't read. I served a couple of years as a vice chair for faculty development at University of Mississippi. I met with every new faculty member that came in, all the assistant and the associate professors. About half of them, when I asked them what was in their contract or agreement letter, said, I don't know, I signed what they put in front of me. Okay. So after like the 4th MI that gave me, I thought this needs to go into the talk because they wouldn't have bought an automobile or probably a blender for their kitchen without knowing what it was going to cost, what it's supposed to do for them, how long can they expect to have it. So please, please, please. It is not rude to want to read an agreement letter before you sign it. And again, this is one of those things, if somebody really pushes you and said, well, you don't really need to know what's in there, again, that's probably somebody you're not going to want to end up working for. The best employee coming in is somebody who knows exactly what they're getting into, that there are 0 surprises on either side. And And all expectations that were stated, that were agreed to, mutually agreeable expectations, are there and are being met. That's the ideal that you're shooting for. So, another question that comes up once in a while is that, well, if I say no to something, will my institution kind of disintegrate around me? Remember, you were hired for specific reasons. Your job was created to do certain things for your division, your department, or your school. Okay. One of those things was not to fix everybody else's problem. Okay? Because there will always be problems that no one employee is going to fix, nor should they even try or be expected to. If you don't come through on the things you promised to do because you've been sidetracked by other activities and other things that are consuming your time and effort, the reasons really won't matter. You will have not met your contractual or agreed to responsibilities. And if you're really, if you feel that you've been deceived or not treated fairly or whatever, this leads down a pretty nasty path, eventually often leading to people leaving or being very disgruntled employees. So, and you may have to manage up. I'm sure you've heard that term. It's probably been brought up in different business meetings or development meetings you've been to. But sometimes the person who's giving you this assignment hasn't thought through all the ramifications. They may not realize that the things you're going to not be able to do because you're taking on this new task. They may not realize that big chunks of what they really needed you to do for that department are now not going to be realized because you're doing this other stuff out in left field. So the best thing you can do for your institution is to be successful and productive at the things you were hired to do. The best thing you can do is be successful and productive at the things you were hired to do specifically. So, with all that being said, well, why do these unexpected or non-contributory invitations come up? Well, a lot of young physicians coming on first faculty job particularly are carrying the three greatest burdens in life: intelligence, industry, and cordiality. So basically, if you're a smart person who works hard and you're a nice guy, everybody and their cousin is going to be asking you to do things. Okay? If they see you're smart, you can accomplish things. You don't scream at them or insult their lineage or something when they ask you to do something, and you're a hard worker. Those are the problem solvers of the world. And if you're perceived like that, which most young faculty are, people from all over the place can be asking you to do things. So, why do these non-contributory invitations come in? Well, sometimes there's a misunderstanding of the terms of your agreement. So this would most likely be with your immediate superior. Your idea of what constitutes 10% time, let's say, may be completely different than what the hiring official might think is 10% time. Others may come up to you, particularly not in your direct chain of command, talking about they don't know what your career direction is. They don't understand why. They see you as a clinical physician, a bedside teacher. Well, why can't you take your 20% protected time and work on my project, which is really important to me? They don't know that you have certain scholarship requirements that you need to meet at that time. And if that weren't the case, you wouldn't be given that protected time to begin with. A lot of times, it's something that's been around for a while and no one could get anyone else to do it. We're going to talk about how to answer these things as they come up in a minute. Inadequate staffing. I've never been anywhere where we felt we had adequate staffing. Has anybody been anywhere? Yeah, I didn't think so. I don't think that place exists, at least not on this planet. Sometimes there are new or additional tasks given to your division or department. So between when you signed and when you actually started, they may have had, let's say, a new hospital put on board that they may have to perform consults on, or a new clinic site. There's also, again, the times that, I think many of us have met people who the idea was get them signed and then we'll deal with the specifics after they get here. And that doesn't really work for anybody. And sometimes there are new orders that come into your superior. So let me divert for just a minute to explain the academic medicine hierarchy. Most people tend to think this is a linear function, that there's somebody higher. If you eventually go high enough, somebody is in charge of everything. Okay, so let's start with our patients who come to us, not really reporting to us, but coming to us to solve their problems. Okay? Now, who do we report to? Well, typically a section chief or division director, who of course has to report to a department chairman, who reports to a dean, who then reports to a vice president or a VP for medical affairs, who then reports to the university president or the practice CEO, who then has either a political leader, like a governor if it's a state school, or Veterans Affairs if it's a federal government thing, or a board of directors if it's a private institution, all of whom answer and get elected by and are chosen by our patients. So in reality, nobody's in charge. Okay. Now, I don't put this up there to be humorous. I think that's an important concept to understand, because getting that idea of a linear hierarchy out will allow you to observe things that are going on and understand them better. Your boss may be your boss, but he or she has a boss, who also has a boss, who also has a boss. I think if you understand this, you're going to be in a much better situation to try and manage up and direct things like, Dr. So-and-so, I can help you satisfy the dean's needs here by me doing this and this other guy doing that. And then he goes, oh, okay, you're helping him. You're managing up in that setting. Okay, let's briefly touch on invitations that don't come through your chain of command. So this is the dietitian in the unit that comes up and walks you, or one of the nurses, or somebody from hospital administration. So the first technique they'll use is they went to your superior, and that person claims that your superior told them to come talk to you. Okay? So, of course, you defer at that time and you check with your superior. It's not uncommon that the superior either has no recollection of this whatsoever or never even encountered this individual. Sometimes they encounter them, usually walking rapidly in opposite directions in the hall, and they said, oh, Dr. So-and-so, we still need this, and they go talk to Geraci. Okay. Never thought anything about it, didn't know what the task was involved, not the price that would be paid, etc. That's another area of managing up, but that's what you would need to convey to your superiors if there's any possibility that you feel you might be taking this on. If it's something you've never heard of, like something coming way out of left field, again, defer, try to get more information on it. So for instance, you go into the hospital, and let's say you're a hospitalist, internal medicine, and somebody comes up to you and says, we've needed somebody just like you to chair the medical utilization committee for like 15 years, and thank God now you're here. Okay? Nobody talked to you about that committee or any of that work when you were negotiating, when you signed up, when you showed up for orientation. Okay. Obviously, if it was something your superiors had intended you to do, it should have at least been discussed at the time that you underwent your agreement negotiations. The ethical pleas. Okay. Oh, we've had this problem for so long, no one's been able to do it, and nobody's had, oh, you're so smart, and you're just so wonderful, and God sent you to us to specifically do this. So my response is, who did you ask before? Okay, those ethical problems were there well before you signed your agreement. And chances are, if they haven't been filled, a lot of other people said no before. So there may be a lot of details in there of things you really don't want to get involved in. And large administrative duties. These should certainly, if your superiors had expected you to take on, let's say, a lab director or a clinic director or something like that, that absolutely had to be in your agreement. Beware of titles. If you learn nothing else, understand the definition of a title. A title is what somebody gives you when they want you to work for free. Okay? Period. That's what a title is. More, not better. And here again, you defer to authority. This might be like a hospital administrator coming and say, we really like you to be the cath lab director. You have all these skills and everything. They don't tell you that it's going to be 20 hours of administrative work every week that they're not going to pay for it. So this is where you go back to your superiors and defer to authority. Okay, there's sometimes not to say no. If a request is fair and equitable work assignments, usually you're going to go along with that. If it's a true emergency coverage, and this primarily will be because you will expect this back in return. That's part of kind of being in the community, being a team player with your group, and someone has a true emergency, you cover for them. The expectation will be if that happens to you, they will cover for you. If it's flexibility within your job agreement. So the example I gave you before, 5 on service, 5 on consults, no more than 8. Let's say you started at 6 consults and 2 ward, And now, because of staffing changes, now it's 5 ward and 3 or 6 ward and 2 consuls. You agreed to that. Okay? You have no stand-in to go back afterward and say, well, that's not what I meant. That's what you signed, so that's what you got to do. You don't have a foot to stand on trying to argue that one away. And occasionally, some of the new things that come up will be beneficial to your career objectives. So you do not want to have a closed mind of saying, I'm only going to do this, I'm only going to do that. When we talk in the next talk about opportunities never come up when you're looking for them. They come up when they come up, and if this is one of them, then that might be one to say yes to. Okay, so why might you say no? If you're becoming the perpetual solution, your superiors are people too. They got a lot on their desk. So if every time there's another month to cover, another weekend to cover, another clinic to cover, and they learn that you always say yes, they have no motivation to ask anybody else. They can quickly discharge that problem by asking you and having you say no. It's a very fast path to becoming inappropriately treated. When it clearly undermines your professional development, it's going to take up all of your discretionary time and you're never going to get your scholarship or your research off the ground. If they're major roles not previously discussed, and I bring this up because I've been there in the room when someone was hired but hadn't started yet, something else comes up at a department meeting and they'll say, oh, Dr. Smith is coming. We'll let him direct that project. And then you find out as a new employee the day you get there and it wasn't discussed with you. If you're getting an unfair workload compared to your equivalent colleagues, and if it's a disproportionate impingement on your non-work time, junior faculty's time off work is just as important as senior faculty's time off work. Okay? Your time on weekends, evenings is just as important as the full professor's nights and weekend time. Okay? And there should be no expectation that seniority gets you have to carry an unfair share of the weight of the division in lieu of the more senior people. I started at a job as a chairman not too long ago, found out that we had a division that had 5 members in it. The 2 senior members had not taken night call or weekend call for 3 years until they saw I was coming, and then they put themselves back on. Okay, and if it's something you have absolutely no interest in, you don't have the skills to do it, it's just, you can't imagine even visualizing yourself in that role. Things to be aware of. Feigned praise. Oh, we've never had anybody like you here before. Oh, you're so good with such and such. Oh, my goodness, you know so much about this. Okay. Praise comes in large trucks and is usually distributed with large shovels. This idea of endearment to your superiors. I've seen this a whole lot in junior faculty. Well, if I just do what everybody tells me to do, then I work really hard, then I'll get promoted and everything will be fine. And then they find out halfway through their assistant professor time that they don't have a chance of being promoted because they didn't hit any of the things they needed to. If you're going to act as a servant, expect to be treated as a servant. That need that should have been discussed with you but was never brought up, like when you show up and say, here's this, well, we didn't talk about it, but I really want you to do this. And my favorite, when your chairman or division director comes to you and say, well, this is a done deal. There's nothing I can do about it. You have to do this. It's not true. Okay, so tactics. We'll spend 2 minutes on ways to do this. Obviously, you want to take the high road. Stress your commitment to the institutional missions in anything you're coming back with. So, for example, well, I would not be able to make the research contributions you'd asked me to make if I take on this other project. Stress fairness, justice, parity, and equality. Now, even if that person doesn't believe in any of this stuff, they're not going to say it. You cannot have somebody who just signed a contract, who sees himself as a respected faculty member, saying, oh, don't give me that justice, parity, and equality crap. You're going to do this because I want you to do it. Not going to happen. Explain the costs that will come out of this to the institution, to the department, to the division, and point out that your institution probably invested a fair amount in you. Not only your startup package, but the interviews, relocation, getting you credentials, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of front-end investment that institutions have to do for new faculty. And that agreement letter, one of the reasons you want as much detail as you can in it is so you have it to bring back should these issues arise. Also, highlight your personal limitations. Dr. Smith, I know you want somebody to do this, but I can't even spell it. I've never heard of this before. I don't know anything about these processes. I don't see any opportunity of me learning it. And even, if you say I have to do this, I'll do it, but I'm going to fail. That usually gets them off your back a little bit. Come back with an alternate plan. You all learned you don't go to somebody with a problem, you go to them with a solution. So this is one of those things. Come back and say, well, I understand this is a need, but here's a better way to do it than just dumping it on me. Consider trading off other benefits. So let's say there's an international meeting you really want to go to, but you don't have funding for. Your boss says, I need somebody to do another month on service. Maybe you can negotiate and say, well, I'll do it, but I really want to go to this trip in Europe for my subspecialty. Will you be able to fund that? And although this is not something you might pick up, but this is a reputation no institution wants to have, that they sustain themselves on a steady diet of their own young. Okay. That's a really bad reputation to get out there, because then the chances of recruiting any good junior faculty will be largely lost. And then what about things that didn't turn out as expected? Things you either never asked about or you didn't think to ask, but they turned out in such a way that no one could have reasonably expected it. I'll give you an example. I joined a cardiology division at a large state school about 15 years ago. They had 35 cardiologists. And I didn't ask what the night call will be. Somewhere in the back of my mind I said 35, 365, there'll probably be some balance in there. I ended up being on call every night for 6 months. And that was in-house call. I lasted about 2.5 years and actually had to stop for my own health. I didn't ask, but I didn't think it was a reasonable expectation. Somebody said, well, you're going to be on service 6 months, therefore you're going to do all the call for the entire practice for 6 months. Not only did that derail any career development, but it was a significant hindrance to my personal health and family health. And another thing is, if you come to this, if this happens, you go talk to your superior and you get well, I wish there was something I could do for you, if no remedy is offered. So when you get to that point, you've got two options. This is the tactical nuclear option. Go for a new job, but at the same institution. Propose an alternate job for yourself. Show how the needs of your old job can still be met by the people who are there or the resources that are there. Highlight what additional benefits you'd be able to provide the institution or the department from your new role at the school. Include probably not a lot of very specific details, but enough details to show that your proposed plan may very well be viable. And also, at this point, however, you have to be ready to renegotiate every aspect of your job, particularly your salary. Okay. If that doesn't work, then you bring in the ICBMs. And this is leaving the institution. So number one, don't threaten to walk out or even talk about walking out until you're ready to walk out. The last thing you want to be known as is a whiner who threatens to go, because the first time you threaten and don't leave, you've lost all credibility from then on. Nobody's going to listen to you anymore. When you're going to leave, give as much advance notice as possible. Have a reasonable explanation when someone asks you why you're going to the new job, not why you are evacuating the old job. Try and approach it positively when people say, oh, why are you moving on? Well, this new place is going to be able to offer me this or provide me with that. Those are things I really want to do. Don't denigrate your employer to others. It is a very small world. If you doubt that, just walk around this meeting for about half an hour. It's a good idea, I think, to help prepare your employer for your departure. Turn over files, whoever's going to be taking specific duties, pass on meeting schedules, things like that. And do everything you can to leave on good terms. So in summary, the best way to avoid future non-contributory invitations is articulate your career plans and goals. Be able to defend with facts and solid reasoning why those are your goals and plans. Negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. The unwanted invitations, always check with your superiors before saying yes to someone who's not in your chain of command. Acknowledge your own value, but be reasonable. Treat the other physicians in your department or your division the same way you hope to be treated if you're in a similar situation. Provide cogent reasoning that includes benefits to the missions that the institution has if you're looking at alternatives. And try everything you can before moving on. Finally, if you do have to move on, leave on good terms. Okay. Questions, comments?